Cats, cops, and C4. She makes no move as the door to the interrogation room opens. With the axiom restricting collar around her neck, she's acting like her life has been cut away. There's a pause and the interrogator scoffs. Don't bother playing. I know you have enough axiom to easily survive, the woman says, and she looks up. And don't start anything about how horrible it is for forcing a cloaking to be seen. You've proven yourself untrustworthy with it. So until you get an official sentencing by a judge, you're going to be wearing that suppression collar. This is barbaric. No, the jokes that some of the men wanted you to wear a bomb collar or a spiked one that would force you to step lightly or be stabbed was barbaric. This is perfectly fair. You're dangerous and unwilling to cooperate with law enforcement. So we disarm you of your weapons while within our custody. In this case, Axiom, she says and receives a glare. Now, the sooner we begin our little question and answer session, the sooner it ends. Let us start with your name. Surely you know it. I want to hear it from your lips. No. Note for the record, Keela Hayes is uncooperative. The interrogator states, and Keela snarls at her. Observing the events from the next room over private stream, slowly turns to face Chink. What's with the soft cell? The innocent-seeming boy asks. Jesus Christ, kid. This is a police station, not Gestapo headquarters. Oh, right, they have to follow the rules, Private Stream says. And so do you while you're here. So I should put it back? Private Stream asks, and Shank's mind races at any one of the billions of things that the sticky-fingered little bastard could have nicked. Yes, he states before glaring down and finding the tiny soldier beaming up at him. He's been had. You're a dick. And you're too easy. I suppose. How's Moriarty doing? He's lowered casualties in his sector of hell by 40%, and the power of the gangs is down considerably. We've had nearly 100 recruits from in there, and he's helped us lift nearly 1,000 people out of abject poverty and desperation. I see, Chink says. Of course, his manipulations did end up pouring gasoline on a grease fire, but if you do the cold numbers, you find out he's saved 3 people for each one he's indirectly gotten killed, Private Stream says. Chink puffs out an annoyed breath of air. Still don't like it? No. Fair, Private Stream says. It's why you're working with officers of the law and not in intelligence. Yes, in part at least, Chink says before frowning as he watches the ineffective and slow interrogation. I'm not going to let you or anyone else from the division in there. We have rules. Of course, don't you worry, Private Stream says in response to the withering glare he's gamely ignoring. This thing is horrific. It embeds itself in the back of the host's head. So much so, there's still little bits of skin, hair, and blood on the hooks. It directly feeds and reads axiom impulses in the brain, which I suppose is good for you humans as you use a much more electrical system. Yes, but forcing one on someone means a degree of helplessness that the person's liable to slit your throat after they realize that the device doesn't sync up with the human mind. It's much like the persona nail. It won't work on a human, but that it's being attempted alone means the person is in mortal danger, regardless, Gerald says, and Alari looks over his shoulder. It's not her specialty, but the general consensus was that any kind of additional insight on a device like this was a good thing. It's a very delicate construction. I can assume that the coma that our former wearer fell into before her death was actually not part of the intended design, but a result of Barnabas grabbing the veil with an axiom-infused hand. It tore several of the thin Kutha strands inside it and overcharged it. Essentially, while an effective and well-crafted piece, these veils are extremely delicate, specialist Allura Cianodel says. The Alfar woman was far from impressed at the device, frail and designed to cover up a weakness of a person. If you can't pay someone to do something, forcing them to do it is not the next logical step. So these have plenty of weaknesses. Still a threat, though. Unfortunately, every part of its construction is with common enough materials. The most exotic is eartheny silk for the actual cloth of the veil. But that's just a more expensive thing to have. Not to mention newly pupated Earthani tend to sell their cocoons for a bit of revenue bump. Gerald says as he thinks, No, I don't think we're going to find much answers beyond a general glimpse at a knowledge base with this and morality. Or rather a lack of it, Allura agrees. You said that there were resemblances with another device, the persona nail? Do you have a sample? All known instances are destroyed, but I have a copy of my notes, Gerald says as he pulls out his communicator and Allura grabs it. Wait, what? That communicator has a lot of protections. You can handle it, but if you try and activate it, then it will destroy its hard drive. Oh, she says before handing it back. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. But does that prevent hacking? See this little switch here? Gerald asks, indicating a sliding switch on the side of the device. That is connected to the hard drive with the classified information. If it's activated by any other method, then it detonates. If the communicator is activated by anyone who isn't me, it detonates. If the communicator is activated by me with this secondary hard drive already slotted in, it sends out an emergency signal and instead presents false information. You're taking this very seriously. Yes, I was one of the primary researchers on the captured persona nails and one of the main specialists involved in safely extracting them from their hosts. How bad was it? 5 girls grown to be women, their youth and innocence stolen so that some psychotic bitch without the stomach to do the work and get herself bloody could have hatchet women. When the nails are inactive, they have a subtle effect on the host that isolates them, alters their patterns, and forces them to live a lifestyle that many would consider unacceptable in prison, Gerald says. Thankfully, the extraction process went about flawlessly, and while the women are still seeing psychiatric counseling on the regular, they're all making progress. I'm glad to hear it. And they're under protection? They had reputations as the enforcers of a psychopath here on Centris. Getting them off planet was just wise, Gerald states. I said too much. That's going to get me a dressing down. Sorry. Not your fault I blabbered, he says genially. Still, here's the information. It will ask for a password in 10 minutes. Just hand it to me. Keeping the password secret? That, and it scans your fingerprint. If it's not my right index finger, then it destroys the hard drive, he says, and her eyebrows go up. This is some hefty security. One of the first major events to happen to us, after numerous pirate attacks and attempts to break into the Dauntless itself, was a massive compromise of our security known only as the hack. Of course we're paranoid. It would be unreasonable not to be at this point. Right, she says and starts scanning the information. This gives Gerald a front row seat to what it looks like when her Axiom presence is filled with disgust, horror, and more than a touch of curiosity tinged with shame. When the password is asked for, she hands back the communicator and doesn't take it back after he keeps it on lockout. I've seen enough. Bad, isn't it? Gerald asks as he decouples the hard drive and deactivates the communicator. It vanishes into one of his pockets. Yes. Thankfully, from what I can tell, this veil isn't anywhere near so comprehensive or so traumatic to force into a victim. Small mercies, Gerald says. Small indeed. If not for the thermal device implanted in the Nagasha, we might have saved her. I'm certain that Specialist Barnabas will be on the lookout for them in the future. Is that entirely fair? Alari asks. He was a little occupied at the time. I wasn't blaming him, just noting that he's going to be on the lookout for such a thing in the future, Gerald says. Still, it's good to see he has friends in the station. I was worried that the man would be ostracized due to being a military man. Police and soldiers don't always get along, Gerald says, not openly acknowledging that he can see Barnabas walk in. Like most Undaunted, the man is quiet on his feet unless openly marching. Don't make a mistake. I don't like him. He's arrogant and far too confident, too eager to fight and too quick to let rules slide far too often. But I doubt, highly doubt, he'd just neglect to save someone if he knew they needed saving. If for no other reason, then he thinks too highly of himself to let it happen. Oh, thank you, Barnabas says, and Alari turns in shock. She hadn't heard him coming and hadn't sensed his approach. Sorry. When did you get here? About when he said I have friends in the station. Barnabas answers, but to cut to the chase so you're rid of me? What's the tactical information on these things? Did I just barely dodge some trap when I ripped it off its wearer? Was it a good thing? A bad thing? A so-so thing. You more or less destroyed the veil when you grabbed it the way you did, causing minimal physical harm to the Nagasha it was on in the process. But there was so much Axiom running through your hand, you set off a cross signal into her brain and sent her into that seizure. I doubt she would have lived due to the bomb, but if you can be more careful next time, you should be able to take it off without issue. Gerald says, and Barnabas salutes. Ilari is just watching him, a slight frown on her face as she tries to make sense of things. I'll pass this on to the rest of the station. Watch your axiom, but get any found veils off. Would tearing them render them ineffective? Yes, these things are very delicate. Just break them, but don't pump axiom in, and it should allow the victim to more ease out than seize out of their control. On it, Barnabas says, and he turns to go. Just like that? Ilari asks, and he pauses before looking back. Just like what? No snide comments, no eye rolls, she demands. No snaps at my being a brute, no comments about my smell. He starts to list off, and her mouth opens with a little ah of acknowledgement. Anyways, I'm off. Hold on, Gerald says. What's this about people complaining about your smell? I've been using a spray-on pheromone killer. Most don't notice the smell. Ilari does, though. Barnabas says with a shrug. Wait, that's anti-pheromone? I thought that was your pheromones. You have never once caught a single whiff of my pheromones. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some information to pass around the station. Barnabas says before leaving, and Ilari just watches him leave. Reevaluating? Gerald asks. Somewhat. Still, that's for later. The station was directly attacked by 4 parties. We need to stay focused. Indeed, which leads to the important questions, Gerald says. Which is, did those groups know they were after this item in particular, or only that it was important? And how did they know, Gerald asks. Are you implying there's a traitor in the force? We can't rule out an officer on the take, but we can't disregard the other options of things just being seen in public, to bugs or taps in the system designed to let criminals listen in. That's true, which means we have to check for all of them. I don't envy you. The numerous tests the undaunted and dauntless go through nearly daily are exhausting and exhaustive. Only sheer practice and familiarity makes them go by with any speed, Gerald says. Really? You're that careful about it? We have more than a few people in protective custody. Not to mention we're a state. We need to be careful as lives depend on us. Entire worlds depend on us at times. One of our worlds, Vuxa 5, was recently attacked. We need to be careful. How bad was it? Bad. We got hit with a cognito hazard, one that makes most races of the galaxy hyperviolent and shows a human their absolute worst nightmare. And what is the human's worst nightmare? Subjective. One man reported that it was like he was part of the horror stories his grandmother used to tell him to get him to behave as a child. Another reported being in hell. One felt himself and the world around him rot. Another was impaled from within and without as everything sprouted needles. It was all personal, and it was all awful, and their friends and families went insane around them. Oh, so yeah, we take cognito hazards very seriously, Gerald says. I understand, which means we can expect higher than average undaunted aid until you're satisfied that the source of these veils has been dealt with. Yes,